Hi everyone, Sajid Amit here and welcome to my review of the Hifiman Arya Stealth. So this is Hifiman's latest revision of the Arya. The Arya is of course a massively popular headphone. They've had two iterations before this. This is the third iteration. So some people are calling it V3, some people are calling it the Arya Stealth, and some people are calling it the Stealth V3. And in this review, I'll be, of course, discussing its aesthetics, build and comfort, its tonal performance, its technical performance, and I'll be drawing lots of comparisons with the Arya V2, which incidentally I used to own, but then I sold it locally and I brought it back for this review. I'll be drawing comparisons with my erstwhile favorite for this price class, the 800S. And the use of the word erstwhile might give away where this review might head. I'll be drawing comparisons with the 4Cal Clear OGs, another very impressive headphone at around this price point. Although the 4Cal Clears can be had at a lower price point on headphones.com. I think you can have it for around $900, which is amazing performance, given an amazing price to performance ratio. And last but not the least, I'll be drawing comparisons to the benchmark of Hifiman planars, which is the Hifiman Susvara. In addition to comparisons, I'll also share some thoughts and opinions on Hifiman Sound, my experience with Hifiman and so forth. So I'll leave that for the latter part of the review. It'll be more like a commentary. Now to start with aesthetics, build and comfort, I think, so the first time I laid my eyes on an Arya, well, it wasn't when I had an Arya in my hand, but when I saw a picture of an Arya, I was very impressed with the very black, minimalistic, stark aesthetics. So I dig that sort of aesthetics. A lot of my favorite headphones are black, and I think what happens with prettier headphones, let's say for example, a Stelia or some ZMF headphones, I think what happens is, because they're so blingy, for me at least, I can have a wow moment with that sort of aesthetics, but over time, I find that I get more bored easily with more blingy aesthetics. With this sort of stark black aesthetics, I feel like I can relate with this sort of over a longer period of time. If aesthetics matter to you, for a lot of you, this will be, not a factor, but I do think of aesthetics a bit. I don't mind, and as a matter of fact, I like this Hifiman sort of double headband system. So the inner headband, of course, is adjustable, and the outer is a metal band. And I really dig these sorts of very oval cups. I think they are very roomy and they do aid to the sense of stage and imaging. And comfort-wise, Arya is very comfortable. I don't perceive the clamp force that some people have talked about. And this is coming from someone who can be very sensitive to clamp, so much so that as much as I liked the Odyssey LCD5, I sold it because it was very clampy for me. I don't have so much of an issue with weight, I think, but I do have massive issues with clamp. This is not very clampy. Like if you see, this is very manageable for me, and I don't get any hot spots, etc. And finally, build quality wise, I think it's quite decent. So I haven't had issues with Hifiman build quality as much as I think a lot of people might have. Although I do think Hifiman has significantly stepped up the build quality, especially for higher end headphones, because if I sort of look at, and I don't have data for this, but if I look at anecdotes that I've witnessed over the last year and a half, especially on the Head5 Facebook group, I feel like more and more people are sort of coming around to the Hifiman sort of build, and I see far fewer criticisms and complaints about QC issues, about build quality issues and so forth. Because when you get into a Hifiman headphone, I mean, you know what you're getting into. You're not going to get premium materials and all that. You're paying mostly for sound quality, which Hifiman does a fabulous job of, which I'll get into towards the end of my review. So yeah, so if you take this Arya V2, which is more than a year and a half old and has been used every day by the guy I sold it to, and I've also used it every day, it shows almost no signs of aging. It looks almost as new as the Stealth. So that's something worth keeping in mind. So the black finish does aid to that sort of perception, or that sort of it won't age as much. People have talked about how the self-adjusting mechanism might leave marks in the inner headbands, especially because there's a black anodization. So marks around this area of the headband. And it does leave marks, but it's, even if you didn't have this black anodization, you'd have marks like you do with the Susvaras, right? So it is what it is. It's not a huge issue. It's not a deal breaker for me at all, because the marks are very, very subtle. I don't know if you can see the sort of vertical marks that, this adjusting mechanism will leave on the inner headband, but like I said, it's not an issue for me. So that's it really. In terms of aesthetics, build and comfort, I give it high marks. More than a passing mark. I like what the Arya looks like. I love what it feels like. It's very light. I think it's around 14 ounces. So yeah, it's impressive as far as I'm concerned. Tonally, the Arya Stealth is one of the best tuned headphones I've heard. It is not exactly Harman tuned. If you look at the graph, it does have more lower treble energy than Harman and more air frequency energy than Harman, which has been done very nicely and tastefully for the Arya, because you should not, graphs are a critical part of the hobby. You should look at graphs, but you should also not listen to graphs, if you know what I mean, because not every headphone will sound like it graphs. So starting with mid-range, for example, this has some of the best mid-range I've ever heard. I'm the sort of person who can appreciate a thick mid-range or a thinner mid-range. This is not a thin mid-range by any means. I think it's a very realistic mid-range, but I've heard headphones that have a thicker mid-range, which I've also appreciated. For example, the LCD4 has a thicker mid-range, which I have loved. And this is a thinner mid-range, not thin on absolute terms. I still love the mid-range. Love it. I think it's realistic. I do think this has slightly more body in its mid-range than many other Hifiman headphones, so that's worth keeping in mind. And it's very linear in the lower mid-range. There is, pinna gain. In around 3-4K, there is slightly more energy than I think you get with Harman, but it's not shouty. It doesn't come off as shouty or in your face because of how the stage is presented. So even though mid-range is somewhat forward, or lower upper mid-range and lower treble, I sort of get the benefits of that more than the cons with this headphone. So I get this immense amount of clarity. Honestly, with this, just purely in terms of tuning related clarity, and also because of its resolution, which we'll come to later, the clarity here is class leading. And as a matter of fact, I think for clarity, it can rival many headphones that are twice as expensive or even more expensive than that. It's a headphone that I really value for its clarity. It's a lot more clear than I think the Focal Clear, of course, no pun intended, and it's a lot more clear than the 800S, than the Arya V2 as well. So I'll draw deeper comparisons later. So continuing with the frequency response, the treble here is magnificent. It is treble done right. It's lucid treble. I'm not a treble head. If you see some of my videos, I might come off as a bass head, and now I might come off as a treble head. I'm neither. I really appreciate all parts of the frequency spectrum, and I think all parts of the frequency spectrum need to come together nicely for me to enjoy, the presentation of a headphone. In the case of the Arya Stealth, the treble is just magnificent. The lower treble is so beautifully done. Like on the graph, of course, we see more energy than Harman, but it's never been piercing or bright for me. It's very reminiscent of the first time or the second time or the third time I listened to the Hifiman Shangri-La Junior, which is such an amazing E-stat. If you can overlook build quality, that E-stat I think is a keeper. So of course I have dropped a review of that, so I don't want to go on praising the Hifiman Shangri-La Juniors. But I'll tell you this, the treble is so beautiful here that it made me want to try the flagship of Hifiman, which is the Hifiman Shangri-La Senior, which I've sort of toyed around the idea of trying to own it or wanting to try it, because one or two of my friends on HeadFi own the Shangri-La Juniors and they swear by it. Like, I've heard the HE1, which was impressive, but not as impressive as I thought it would be. But anyways, so just to sort of get back to the point about treble, the treble here is lucid. It's very, very E-stat-like in the sense that it's very sparkly, but it's not piercing unless you're pairing it wrong. E-stat treble, if you've not heard of Stax 009S, if it's not paired with the right chain, with the right amp and DAC, it can come off as piercing. But let's say for my use cases and using the chains that I've used mostly in my house, which is Denafrips DACs and Hollow-made DACs, with I've used Kevin Gilmore amp with my E-stats. I've never had a piercing presentation from any E-stat. So that's to say that, so this is very reminiscent of an E-stat treble. I think a lot of Hifiman headphones have treble done so well. Even the Susvara is reminiscent of E-stats, perhaps much more so than the Arya. So that's Hifiman Sound generally, but I think, yeah, I just can't stop raving about this treble, guys. I don't find it attacking, piercing, sharp, annoying, grating, unrefined, rough, nothing. I find it smooth, lucid. The Susvara has even smoother treble, which might be a good or a bad thing. I'll come to that later. But as is evident, I'm just a big fan of the treble of the Stealth. It's just such an amazing treble, and it just goes to show that you can have deviations from Harman and still, depending on the drivers and how they're positioned and the driver technology and the overall make of the headphone, You can have more energy in the lower treble, but still have the best effects of that and not have the worst effects of that, which is you won't get the piercing or the sharpness, but you'll get the clarity and openness and airiness, which is what this does. The bass, surprisingly good. Surprisingly good. I don't think the bass is wanting, and I've generally found issues with Hifiman bass. I have over time, ever since I've traversed the world of, or delved deeper into Focal headphones and Abyss headphones, I have become a very picky customer about bass. I care about bass impact. I care about bass decay. So if a bass is too fast in attack and decay like Stax headphones are, it doesn't work out for me in the long run. If the bass decay is very slow, like I think the Z1R can be, it can sound very realistic, but I think on ABing it can sound a bit too slow. The bass impact is important for me. I don't necessarily like sort of a poofy impact that some headphones can provide, some DCA, some Dan Clark headphones and others. But the bass here is really, really impressive. It's got impact, and it might not graph like that, but it does have impact. It has noticeably more impact than other headphones on my table, which I'll get into. It's fast. It's got good decay, and it's tight. It's linear all the way down. It's amazing bass extension. So, to give you an example, I've been listening to all genres with this, like all kinds of genres with this. I've enjoyed metal, rock, vocals, everything with this. Fantastic all-rounder, and I strongly second what DMS said in his review of the Arya. I think it's a fantastic review. Just a shout out to DMS, and I think honestly, this is a headphone in terms of tonality and everything else that I'll come to that can do nothing wrong. It does nothing wrong. It's very impressive for its tonal performance. So that out of the way, to talk about technical performance, this is a very resolving headphone. It's more resolving than I think other headphones in this price class that I'll get into. The soundstage is magnificent. It's wide. It's just such a spatial take on tracks, and I just love it. I was listening to Jason Isbell's rendition of Night Swimming, and God, the imaging was so beautiful, like massive images, well separated, very, very Arya. And I know there's this narrative about whether the V2 has a bigger stage, the Stealth, and I'll get into that, but it's just beautiful. The stage is amazing, and one of the best stages I've heard in a headphone, probably top 3. Along with the 800S and possibly the rather requisite SR1A. In terms of dynamics, like I said, it's punchy, it's fast, so I give it high marks for dynamics. And in terms of timbre, beautiful, better timbre than the previous Arya, and very natural sounding. So overall, for technical performance, this is very impressive. This is very impressive. I think it achieves 90% of many Summitify headphones. Not all, but I think, for example, this gives ZMF headphones a serious run for their money, and a lot of other headphones, some Meze headphones, flagship Meze headphones, etc. Now, to talk about how this fares in terms of the other headphones I have here, starting with not the V2, I'll get into that, but the 800S. So the 800S was the leading headphone for me in its price class. This comes in around $1,700. I've always liked to own the 800S. Firstly, I really like the aesthetics. It's very iconic. I like what it feels like. It's very light, it's very non-clampy, and it's just so comfortable to have around your head. So this was my headphone whenever I wanted to listen to more laid-back tracks. So although it's slightly more analytical, but because it doesn't have the bass impact, and it doesn't work very well for me with rock and metal and stuff. So what I do with this, or what I've done with this, is when days I've just sort of chilled at my recliner, this was my headphone with my jab, and I've just sort of kicked back with this to more laid-back genres, vocal-based genres, and genres that token, need massive stages like orchestra, soundtrack, music, etc. Wonderful headphone for me to chill out with. So this is now being replaced with the Stealth, because the Stealth does everything this does, because it's it gives you that performance if you need to kick back on your recliner and listen to vocal-based tracks with massive stage and all that. But this also does bass well. This is a much better extension, better slam and punch. And the mid-range is also much sweeter. So the sweetness of mid-range is very evident once you AB, and to some extent this has made me feel like the 800S mid-range is dry. Treble-wise, this has slightly more energy, around 6K, which can be more sibilant. So I do find, I've never found this bright on an absolute level, but on AB, to me, this is more troublesome in the treble than this is. And finally, yeah, so they're both very spacious and airy. So they're both wonderful headphones. This is slightly more resolving, but just ever so slightly. But I think overall, the strengths of the Stealth are far more in relation to the 800S than the strengths of the 800S are in relation to the Stealth. So I think this is, to my mind, honestly, not just a more preferable headphone, but I would just go out on a limb and say this is a better headphone. And I'm considering selling this. So that's my comparison with the 800S. And now moving on to the Focal Clears. This is a headphone that I've had, a love and hate relationship with, because initially when I was driving this off the topping A90, I didn't like this because I don't think the A90 combines really well with Focal headphones. I think they sound more metallic, more anemic, and just dry and soulless, honestly. But I think I've liked this headphone with other amps and DACs that I've had. I've liked this a lot, and I think this works really well with like more upbeat genre. This has very good sub bass, very good bass, a nice frequency response, very neutral. But I think once you A/B with the Stealth, the first thing that comes to my mind, or first thing I perceive, is that this has a more metallic timbre. So the lead guitar is on many tracks. I was listening to Brandi Carlile's cover of Soundgarden, a band that not a cover of Soundgarden, but Soundgarden's song, a very famous song, Black Hole Sun. A nice cover, and a song that I've listened to growing up. The Seattle grunge scene was a big part of our lives growing up in high school. But having said all that, I think the lead guitar on Brandi Carlile's cover of Soundgarden's Black Hole Sun was perceptibly more metallic on this than on this. The lead guitar was very fluid and just very, very present on this because of the clarity it also has in around 3 and 4K. But I think so. You also get slightly more unevenness in treble. So this is a smoother treble. Although on the graph this will look like this has more treble energy, but it's treble done right. It's smooth despite the energy. This doesn't have that smoothness, I think, and especially now that I have a Utopia and I listen to Utopia a lot. The relative difference in smoothness in the treble between the Focal Clears and the Utopia becomes more prominent to me. This has issues in the treble, I think. This is more metallic and a little more uneven, etc. And finally, I think mid-range wise, this is sweeter and more engaging. And although this slams a bit harder, it's not a huge difference, honestly, because this does have slam, which is something I think you need to audition and see for yourself. But I strongly think that the Arya Stealth has slam and very impressive levels of slam. Not Focal levels, but impressive given Hifiman's other headphones. And finally, I think overall in terms of resolution and soundstage, of course this doesn't have great soundstage, and resolution wise, this I think beats the Focal Clear. And overall, I think it's clearly a superior headphone for my preferences compared to the Focal Clears. So now to talk about the Arya V2, which I have been thinking a lot about and A/Bing between the Arya V2 and the Stealth continuously to try to understand exactly how they're different. So the narrative that the differences are minor, I think is accurate, but I think is still misleading because the Stealth improves upon the V2 on a whole variety and a large number of traits. And although these differences are small, but because the differences are many and across many parameters, I think they all add up, and in my case, to create a significantly more enjoyable presentation. So to give you examples of these differences, this is better imaging. This is better resolution. This has better clarity. This has much better bass in my mind. This has better treble air frequencies. So if you add up all that, I think what you end up with, for me, for my use case, is a significantly more enjoyable headphone. Like, in comparison to the Stealth, this sounds slightly mushier. In comparison to the Stealth, it lacks the clarity and presence in terms of the 3-4K frequency response, often with electric guitars. I think that the soundstage width is slightly more on the V2, but it's so slight the difference, honestly, that I've had to, like, I don't care about the soundstage difference because this is like as much soundstage as you'll get on a headphone. And the minute differences that this has, I think, is not worth it for me. So overall, guys, I think this is a more coherent presentation, the Stealth. This is a more enjoyable presentation. This works with greater genres, a greater number of genres. And this is also a slightly more forward presentation without being forward. So I think this is more neutral. The V2 sounds more laid back in comparison. So that is interesting, I think. So those of you who like more aggressive genres like metal and rock, and still like laid back genres like vocal based music and acoustic music, you definitely want to get the Stealth. Overall, I'm just very impressed with how the Stealth is a much better all-rounder than the V2. So yeah, I mean, better headphones. So if you're wondering if you should upgrade, I think, so I never like being prescriptive, but in this case I want to be prescriptive because I honestly don't see what this lacks that the V2 has, and it just improves the V2. So I think if you can afford the upgrade, give it a shot. This is just amazing. And of course, if you can audition before upgrading, that's even better. So try an audition before you upgrade. That's always advisable. And finally, to compare the Stealth with the super duper Hifiman Susvara, the first thing you notice is the tonal difference. So I think once you A/B between the Susvara and the Stealth, the first thing you notice is the Susvara is more laid back. So some people will call it more refined, and it is certainly more refined, and this shows that this is a higher end headphone, especially because the Susvara has more resolution, but the resolution is presented in such a wonderful way. Like, it will never attack you, and it never becomes fatiguing. So Susvara is, very admirable for that, but it's more laid back. It's just a more laid back presentation that I think works less well with genres like heavy metal and rock. I think the Arya Stealth works better with heavy metal and rock, and I stand by this. I think so. This is a better proposition if you like heavy metal and rock. Of course, this is a technically superior headphone, and clearly so, but technical superiority does not necessarily translate to working with all genres. Like, an example, of course, is the RAL requisite SR1A, which is technically just so impressive, but it doesn't have sub bass, or as much sub bass as I like, for it to work with heavy metal genres. Some people like the speed it has, which they suggest works really well with aggressive genres, and it can and it does if that's your jam. But for me, the RAL requisite SR1A, despite its technical chops, did not work as well with aggressive genres. And the Susvara doesn't either, although it's better than the RAL for those kinds of use cases. But I think the Stealth is more preferable for me. But like I said, this is a technically superior headphone. So this does have better layering, better depth, better detail, better speed. This is lightning fast. And in microdynamics, I think they're similar. I would give a slight edge to the Stealth. Guys, I've owned and loved Susvara for a year and a half, so I'm not knocking the fact that it doesn't have slam and punch. It does, but I think other headphones do it better. And I've tried this with all kinds of speaker amps, so it's not an issue of amps. I've tried Accuphase, Past Labs, own both, Lushman, Macintosh, even Griffon, which are famous speaker amplifiers for their punch and slam with the Susvara. I've tried all kinds of DACs with the Susvara, the Hull Audio DAC that I have, Denafrips DACs, DCS DACs, and of course the Cord Dave, which I had in my house, which I owned for several days. So it's not a chain issue. The Susvara punch and slam is fine. I'm not knocking it, but I think others do it better, and I've increasingly gravitated towards headphones that have better punch and slam. This, to my mind, has better punch and slam than Susvara. So those are the only two things I think this has more lower treble energy and more punch and slam than Susvara, which make it more aggressive, more engaging in the good sense. So while retaining vocal sweetness and all that. This does not match the Susvara for vocal sweetness, because the Susvara vocal sweetness and vocal depth, vocal micro nuance, vocal texture is just from a different planet. Like, you can almost follow the vocals into a vocalist's sort of lungs, I often feel. It's just such a crazy microscope into vocal micro nuances and dynamics and textures that I just really love the Susvara for. So yeah, I mean, this will not sound as sweet as the Susvara, but this sounds remarkably sweet, and as sweet as I need, honestly, in the vocals. But with great clarity of guitars, great percussion, great everything. So I will make a case for this, even if you own the Susvaras. I think this can be a bit of a daily driver if you like, having a headphone and using it around the house, because it's easier to drive, it's more portable. And then this is, of course, you can run this off a DAP. The other thing I want to mention, it's far more easy to drive than the V2s. So off my Ferrum Audio stack, I have my volume dial at around 9 o'clock with the Stealth. With the V2s, however, I have my volume dial at 12 o'clock. So the V2s are more difficult to drive. So this is another sort of, I think interesting and worthwhile attribute worth mentioning for the Stealth. Now, this is a headphone that I've decided to buy. And it's interesting because when I first heard it, I I liked it a lot. I reached out to Hifiman. I requested Hifiman for a review unit. They agreed. But then I really liked it, so I didn't wait for the review unit. I just bought it from a local headfire. And a big shout out to Modasim for supplying me with this, and honestly for selling me with this, because I'm really in love with this headphone, the Arya Stealth, and I strongly recommend it. Final words about Hifiman Sound. Hifiman is such a consistent performer when it comes to sound. I think a year and a half ago, I made a lot of comments on Facebook, I think, on the Headfiles Facebook group, that I think Hifiman has an astounding consistency and sound quality. And some people agreed, but I think now that I see more and more reviewers talking about Hifiman's consistency, I'm a bit heartened by it, because I mean, we need to call out the good with the bad, right? Because we have called out Hifiman's build quality issues, and people have over time. I do sense that, just from anecdotally, like I said, looking at Facebook posts on the Headfire Facebook group and different people and how they respond to Hifiman headphones, I find that there are far fewer issues of, QC issues and so forth. So maybe Hifiman is working it out. I can't know for sure because I haven't done a data analysis, but I do think more and more people are realizing that Hifiman tunes headphones really well, whether it's Sundara, the Arya, the Ananda, the Susvara, HE1000 headphones, and of course the Shangri-La Junior, which is a remarkably well-tuned headphone for an E-Stat. Much better tuned than any E-Stat out there, the Shangri-La Juniors. I've dropped a review of the Shangri-La Juniors. I miss it sometimes, and I really think those of you who are getting into E-Stat should give the Shangri-La Juniors a try. This reminded me of the Shangri-La Juniors because this has this sort of beautiful, lively treble energy without ever being bright or sibilant. And in terms of Hifiman sound, so if you look at these two headphones, right, this is more Harman tuned. So from 3K to 7K, this is very polite, very laid back, very smooth. This, on the other hand, 3 and 4K, this has more energy than Harman. The Shangri-La headphones also have more energy in around the treble region, both lower mid treble and upper treble. So Hifiman has experimented with different treble representation, and I think they've hit it out of the park every time. They do treble so well, right? Of course, they don't do the sort of bass impact and slam that the original HE6 had, and I understand even the newer iterations don't. So this is not an HE6 and it's slam, but this is impressive because Hifiman has actually tuned this headphone to have bass impact. So check it out. Very impressive headphone. And overall, I really like Hifiman sound. They're remarkable in their consistency in tuning a headphone. And I want to think, and I think they are addressing build issues more and more, and their QC has always been great. So a shout out to Hifiman as well for stepping up their game and their consistency in tuning headphones, and last but not the least, and in particular, for a wonderful headphone. This is a real gift to the Headfi community, and I wish for all of you to try this because I think a lot of you will love this, and a lot of you might prefer this or want to add this to your stable, even if you have Summit Fi headphones. And in technical performance chops, it's so close to Summit Fi level. I think that honestly, it could well be the end game for most of you, for 99.99% of you, if you can afford it, of course, which is an issue because it's not exactly cheap. But yeah, I mean, if you can save up for this, or if you can own this at some point, of course, better headphones will come out, I'm sure. But this is really remarkable for its price. My favorite headphone at its price point, and one of my favorite headphones, period, I think. For pure musical enjoyment, I would rank this in my top 10. So that's it for me. I hope this was useful. Stay tuned for further videos, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.